History of a Teacher by Famous Font. Chapter 34. Epilogue. I thought I would find you here, the voice said, and although Yugi had not heard it for 5 years, he knew who it belonged to at once. Did you? Yugi asked as he stared down at the monument carrying his friend's name. Yes, I've been coming here every day ever since the funeral. I didn't think you could stay away forever, the young man said and came to stand next to Yugi. You ought to come and pay your respects sooner or later. You've been very patient, Yugi remarked, still not looking at the other. I didn't only come here for you. I pay my respects too. I like being here. I can remember the good. Besides, I have little else to do, he said with a sigh. I feel guilty, Yugi said slowly, because I wasn't there for their funerals. I'm sure they'll forgive you. You are here now, aren't you? He said with a soft smile and put a flower on the grave. A white rose. Thank you, Rio, Yugi said and looked at his old friend who was holding an additional amount of 4 white roses in his hands. His sign to let everyone know that he had been there. Do you bring them roses every day? Yugi had a hard time believing that. Rio shook his head. Once a week and on special days. He must be glad you finally chose to show. I believe he's tired of having only me to visit him. His father never does. His mother only sometimes. I see Shizuka here at times, though. I usually pay my respects to the others first, and wait until she's gone before I come here. I believe that Shizuka's presence would make Jomochi most happy. She's more important to him. Yugi looked at his friend's grave, wishing he could leave something behind. Am I? Does she ever come? I haven't seen her, he said, then frowned. Why are you speaking English? Yugi chuckled. I have spent some time in England. I didn't believe the rumors, Rio said, and turned away from Jinochi's grave as he and Yugi slowly made their way to the grave directly next to Jinochi's. They were buried with a day between each funeral. I spent more than a week doing nothing else but attending funerals. At the time I wished I would have left, like you did. It weren't peaceful funerals. They were too many, too fast after each other. We were all burned out at the end of it. The funerals were horrible. Don't feel guilty for having missed them. What matters is that you are here now. They stopped in front of Anzu's grave. Yugi was the albino, grateful for his kind words and his lack of questions. He assumed that they would come eventually, and he would deal with them later. As if Rio had heard his thoughts, he put down a rose and said, I won't ask too much, but are you going to stay? Yugi nodded. I think so. The game shop is silently waiting for your return. It's in good shape, even the remaining inventory, although some of it might be slightly outdated, Rio assured him. Are you going to open it again? That was my intention, Yugi said and looked at the sky before moving on to the next grave. Hondo's grave was well kept and a lot of flowers and incense were on it. Rio put down his white rose. His family comes here all the time, with the dog, although that's not allowed. I suppose mischief runs in the family then, Yugi said with an unconvincing smile. Rio returned the smile nonetheless and put a hand on Yugi's shoulder. Together they moved on to the next grave. I don't even know him, Rio said as he put down the flower. Since he was in the tomb, I just feel obliged to maintain his grave as much as that of the others. No one else ever comes here. Yugi shrugged. It wasn't all that surprising that no one ever visited Kaiba's grave, although he had expected Mokuba to visit at least, but apparently not. Mokuba? Rio shrugged. I have no idea. Kaiba Corporation was sold to Shorter Corporation, and yet Kaiba land is still built all over the world. I don't really know, but I suppose Mokuba is somewhere in that business. It would make sense, Yugi said, and realized just how much he had missed during the time he had been gone. Not only his year in Hogwarts, but all 5 years. Before Yugi could move on to the next grave, Rio put a hand on his shoulder and stopped him from moving on. Do you have a place to stay? The fact was that Yugi hadn't. He was so used to living without having a place to stay that he hadn't even given it a thought. He always spent the night somehow. It usually figured itself out. He shook his head. Then I'll wait outside the graveyard for you. He handed his last flower to Yugi and walked out without giving a hint of explanation. Yugi looked after him. The survivor really hadn't changed much. He was still as kind as he had always been. Exactly how kind, Yugi didn't realize until his eyes fell upon the next grave. His grandfather's name was the last to drop, and Yugi fell to his knees weeping like a child. He was the only relative his grandfather had left, and he had not even been present at the funeral. He hung his head in shame. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered through his tears, and for once he felt like a child again, a child who really needed his grandfather's support, and he felt like he had it. "Everything is chaos." Talking to the grave didn't feel the least weird. It felt good. "I became a teacher at a school for wizards and witches. Did you know Rebecca was a witch? She hated it. They are at war. A man named Voldemort tried to take over the wizarding world and make all non-magical people slaves. The man who killed you was one of his followers, but he's in prison now. I could have killed him. I've wanted it. But in the end, I couldn't do it. He killed Rebecca." New tears sprung to Yugi's eyes, and there was nothing he could do about it. "It's chaos when it comes to the shadows, too. They're not gone. Since Atem couldn't pass into the afterlife, they weren't destroyed. The Pharaoh is still with me. He's stuck here. I feel so bad for him. The shadow creatures are acting on their own, and the dominion of the beasts has started to interfere too. They are both trying to get the shadows gone forever. It's not a bad thing, but they don't have any limits. They knew Rebecca was going to die. They wanted it to happen. They told Raphael Rebecca was going to die. He was her guardian after her grandpa died, and he let it happen." That little fact was something Yugi had a hard time comprehending. Yugi hadn't been mad at him. If Raphael chose to let her die, he must have had one hell of a good reason. A reason Raphael hadn't shared with Yugi. But the Japanese hadn't pushed on either. Raphael wouldn't budge anyway. Even though he had known, he had been devastated. "He knows more than he told me. He is glad I didn't kill Lucius, though. Glad I learned to let go of my hatred. I never realized I couldn't get rid of the shadows as long as my hatred and attempts was fueling them. I suppose that's why the beasts wanted Rebecca to die. It was the only thing which could make me and Atem confront our hatred. It was a gamble, though. A test, but could just as easily have failed it." Yugi was comforted in an odd way, pouring his heart out to the person which had always been his haven, although not always equally reliable, was something he had really needed. The tears dried, and although the grief after either of his friends hadn't lessened the slightest bit, it seemed more bearable. The same thing counted for his guilt and worry. "I'm going to open the Kami game shop again," Yugi said with a modest smile. "Pegasus will be pleased to hear I've resurfaced. I'll have to disappoint him, though. It'll be hard coming back here, but I'll manage, somehow. I ran into Rio. He doesn't seem to be angry. I have him to thank for taking care of you for such a long time. But from now on, this is something I'll do." "This flower is from him. He gave it to me." He put down the white rose. "Although I suppose you already knew that. He'll have lots of questions, and I can't answer most of them. Rebecca thought they had a right to know. Not only Mokuba and Rio, but all of them. I just don't have the privilege to tell." Yugi sighed. "I make it sound like a cheap excuse. I don't know what's right or wrong anymore, Grandpa." He got no reply, and it was an uncanny reminder that the thing he was talking to was a tombstone. His grandfather might still be in his heart, but he didn't let his truthful and not always easy words be heard. Yugi stood up and looked at the next grave. The name wasn't one he recognized. He turned away from the graves and started to walk towards the exit. First, now, he noticed that Atem had given him complete privacy, and he was grateful. "You can come out now," he told his partner. He received no reply, but he could feel Atem's presence. Like he had said, Rio was waiting just outside the graveyard. He didn't say anything when he saw Yugi coming, and Yugi realized his eyes must have been red from crying. He decided not to care. The sun had started its trip down, and the dusk was starting to surround them. "Come on. I don't live far from here. You can stay the night, and tomorrow you can deal with the formalities." As if Rio had felt Yugi's heavy load, he gave a soft and kind smile. "Don't worry. You'll be fine. Both of you." Yugi held back a laughter of hopelessness. Of course Rio had known. It wasn't even a surprise. He just hoped Rio was right. Starting over felt like the hardest task he had ever been faced with. End of History of a Teacher by Famous Fault. Thank you for listening to History of a Teacher. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening.